Hello, and welcome to the Admittedly podcast. My name is Thomas Khalil. I'm the former director of MBA admissions and financial aid for my alma mater, the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. In this podcast, I don't promise easy answers or quick fixes, but I will use my decades of experience to help you achieve your education goals. Now let's get started. Thomas Khalil, and today we're going to talk about essays. It's essay season on our TikTok and Instagram. People are panicking, is a good word to use. What should I write? How should I write it? What is a good topic? What is a bad topic? And I understand that. It can be a very stressful process, and there's a lot of advice out there about essays. And so I want to talk to you today about the process, about why essays even matter, right? And I think that's a good place to start. Why do schools use essays? We've seen comments where people are saying, well, essays aren't used in company recruiting, so why would they be used in school? It's ridiculous. And I think it's very important to kind of step back and say, all right, when you are 18, when you're applying to university or even earlier for boarding school, right, there's a very limited data set from that schools can use to pull from. And they're trying to figure out who you are, what matters to you, what your life experience has been. And essays are a great way to do that. I know as an applicant, you're probably thinking, oh, this is so confusing and it's so unfair. But really, it's your opportunity to talk to the school and tell your story. And why does that matter? It matters because when we think about grades and test scores, right? And those kind of hard metrics of your success academically, what happens is, and I've talked about this before, when we have 50, 60,000 applications, there's a large chunk of them that have almost perfect GPAs and almost perfect test scores. And so it's impossible for schools to simply pick students who have the academic ability. But also, we don't just want to limit ourselves to the top academic performers, because we need to take each student's particular experience, life experience, perspective into account. And so, a student with a 3.5 GPA may have a just as valid story as a student with a 4.0 GPA. And essays allow the schools to get inside that student's mind, understand their experience, put their achievements in context. So, let's talk a little bit, though, about how you are successful in the essay process. And I would first urge you to go to our TikTok and look at the series that I've done on storytelling, because storytelling is such an important component of this. And to those people saying, well, why do essays even matter? I don't need this skill. You do need this skill. You need the ability to communicate your thoughts, your ideas to other people. You need to communicate in the workplace via email or instant message or Slack or whatever it is. You need to communicate to bring people on board. You need to be able to interact with people, to get information from them, to build friendships, alliances, relationships. All of these things relate to storytelling, and reading and writing are still fundamental skills. These are skills that you need in any aspect of work. And I can hear my STEM candidates saying, yes, but I want to be, a programmer. I want to study computer science. I want to sit at my computer all day and crank out code. And yes, but also you need to, as you're learning that, you need to interact with other people. If you have let's say you write a genius piece of code, you need to be able to communicate that to others. Maybe you need to raise money around it. Maybe you need to deal with investors or a board or sell your idea to a company. All of this involves communication, and all of it involves storytelling. And storytelling is very important because there are so many different ways to tell a story. And throughout the history of mankind, throughout the history of humanity, people have been telling stories either through cave paintings or oral tradition or writing things down. I mean, this is an important part of who we are. It's how we share ideas. It's how we communicate values. And I think the important thing when we're thinking about essays is, how do we tell our story? And there are a lot of different ways to tell a story, right? So if we put this in a high school English context, right, you have Hemingway, you have F. Scott Fitzgerald, you have Dostoevsky, you have Chinua Achebe, you have all these different storytellers, right? There are so many ways that you can tell a story. It's important to find your voice. It's very important to find that modality that suits you best, because if you're trying to force yourself to tell a story in somebody else's voice, you will not be very successful. You certainly won't be persuasive or the most persuasive that you can be. And so the first thing we need to do is think about, what is my voice? How do I tell a story? The second thing is, what story am I telling? Now, some applicants certainly may have had things happen in their life where they have a story that seems dramatic or flashy. And, and sometimes those are good experiences, sometimes bad experience. But most, I think, students have led what I would say is a somewhat normal life. They have studied hard. They've had various family and friend relationships. They may have done sports or arts or volunteering, all these things that kind of make up that journey. And so a lot of students will come to me and they'll say, all right, but I don't have this big dramatic thing. I didn't summit Mount Everest. I didn't start a nonprofit that raised $5 million with Greta Thunberg, and I didn't speak at the UN, and that's okay. Part of the series on storytelling on TikTok looks at different creators, right? Some of them telling big stories, some of them telling very mundane stories, right? When you look at it from the outside, but as you listen to the story and they draw you in, then you start to realize, okay, I'm learning a lot about this person, about this individual through this story. A good resource that I always recommend to people is The Moth on NPR, on social media, as a podcast. And what it is a collection of people telling stories, very different people, very different stories. And so if you're struggling to figure out what your voice is, this is a great resource for you to go in and listen to people telling their stories and get a sense of, okay, how do I get that introductory hook? How do I grab the listener's attention or reader's attention? Then how am I building my narrative arc? How am I creating tension that I ultimately resolve in the conclusion, loop it back to the intro, and kind of square the circle, if you were. Now, sometimes that conclusion can be somewhat basic. Sometimes that conclusion can be a bit of a twist or a surprise ending. I think, again, that comes to you finding your voice, and it depends on the story you're trying to tell. But at the end of the day, I think what we need to do is think about, what do I want to communicate to the admissions committee in this application? And that brings up another question we're getting a lot, which is, I have a lot to tell, so where do I put what in the application? And I think a mistake that a lot of applicants make is that when the common application opens, they jump right in and with very good intentions start cranking away on that common application essay. What I would encourage you to do is kind of step back, right? First of all, think about, I have all of these things that make up who I am as a human, as a student, as an applicant. And what I would like you to do is step back and say, okay, there are too many things, there are too many parts of me, in most cases, to put in this application. If I try and put everything in, I'm going to just cause a lot of noise and confusion and muddy the waters. So what we want to do is we want to look and we say, okay, we have the activity list, for example. So that's going to tell the admissions committee very specific things about what we do, how we spend our time, how we allocate our time and our resources. So we don't want to use the essays to simply regurgitate, I did this, I did this, I did this. You've heard me say this before, right? We show, not tell. We give examples of things that we have done, and we create the atmosphere where the reader understands why we're doing things, what our motivation is. But what you also have to do, as you're thinking about the common application essays, you need to go in and look at the supplements, right? So each school in the common application will have a supplement. Some of them will have additional writing. Some of them will not. If a school does not have additional writing, then you need to think about communicating everything that you want to communicate in the common application essay itself. But for schools that have supplements, right, some of them might have one essay, 3 essays, Stanford has, multiple short answer questions, short essays, small prompts. In that case, then you need to look at the entirety of the application and say, okay, here's my message. Now, how do I break it up and where do I put those different pieces so that the reader gets an entire view of me? Because what you don't want to do is have essays that overlap too much and are repetitive. So if the reader reads a Common App essay and then they go to the supplement essay and they say, well, I just read most of this in the Common Application essay, we're losing an opportunity to talk about ourselves. So be judicious, be smart, and be strategic as to where you are breaking these things up. Now, I think it's important to talk about topics. And I've talked about this idea of big topics, little topics. One of the examples that I give in my series on storytelling on TikTok is of this person, Jim. He's at Sandwich Idiot, and he loves sandwiches. And I mean, it is something he absolutely geeks out on. He goes in, he researches the history of it. He looks at ingredients in the region. He looks at culinary traditions in that particular region or state or city or country. He makes the bread. He looks for the spices if he can get them, but he's not overly fastidious about it. Right? He'll say, look, I have limitations. I can't fly there and try this. These ingredients aren't available. So I read the recipe, I thought about it, and I thought this might be a good substitution. And so I played around with it. I made 6 different varieties. This worked, this didn't work. And you're probably asking yourself, well, what would sandwich making and what would an obsession with sandwich making have to do with college admissions? But what it shows is a relentless intellectual curiosity, right? And a passion for something. So you can tell by these videos that he makes, this is something he cares about, and it's something that he thinks about very deeply, and it's something that allows him to connect and share with family and friends. And so as you are looking at your own life and your own experiences, think about those things that really are meaningful to you, right? Think about those things that you talk about when you talk about your eyes light up. Think about those things that if given a chance, you would do if you had a free day. And I know that that's a cliche question, but the heart of the matter is, what is it that wakes you up in the morning excited to greet the day? And feel free to talk about that. Right? You don't need to be trauma dumping. There doesn't need to be some big, I know there's a movement where you need to tell about this trauma and how you survived it and how you resolved it. And, if that's been your journey, certainly we can talk about it. We want to make sure we don't dwell on the trauma itself, right? It's perfectly fine to say, this happened, boom. Now let's focus on me, because that's what the essay is about, right? It's about me. You can also keep in mind, illustrate different aspects of your personality through one example. So if we go back to the sandwich example, right? We're looking at, as I said, intellectual curiosity. We're looking at cultural awareness. We're looking at an ability to think creatively and laterally, right? To adjust to things on the fly. These are all values that you can communicate in an essay that is seemingly unrelated to admissions specifically, but you're communicating these values to the reader. Now, another topic that's come up quite a bit is AI. ChatGPT, etc. And I get a lot of questions or a lot of comments on, hey, I'm just going to have ChatGPT write my essay. And I want to take a stand here and just say, I think that's a terrible idea. I think that ChatGPT can be good to generate ideas, right? So you can write some prompts, especially if you're kind of trying to figure out how to connect seemingly disparate things that you do, or if you're having trouble like forming things. But the issue with ChatGPT is that it's overly slick. It's overly processed. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that these admissions officers are reading thousands and thousands of applications each cycle. And they're spending maybe 4 to 5 minutes maximum on your application. So they open that application, they start reading your essay. And if what they're reading is overly processed and slick, right? It's grammatically perfect. It's constructed well, correctly. The problem is that they don't get a sense of you. They can't break through that. And you become one of tens of thousands of essays that tells a story but does not resonate or connect with the reader because it is not genuine. And in a hyper competitive admission cycle, you are going to get kind of knocked to the side. They'll say, oh, I mean, fine, they do fine here, but they really missed the point of this exercise. So feel free to use ChatGPT to generate some ideas, but then write de novo. Start from scratch, blank screen, blank piece of paper, and write in your own words. Because what happens as well, and this is a danger with over editing, right? So a lot of students will write an essay and in very well meaning, they'll give it to their parents, they'll ask them for input, they'll give it to their English teacher. I've talked about this before. And what happens is that as a reader, you see those changes in tone, in cadence, in syntax, and you don't know who made the changes, but you know that changes were made. And it's distracting to the flow of the essay and certainly not something that's going to be positive in your favor. It is much better to have a less perfect essay that gives the reader the sense of who you are than something that's highly polished and grammatically perfect. Likewise, big fancy words. A lot of people think that using big fancy words makes them sound intelligent, makes them sound erudite. I would say, please don't do that, right? Be more Hemingway than Dostoevsky. You don't need to have these big, weighty run-on sentences full of all this just heavy, heavy prose. Right? Help the reader understand you. Help the reader move through these essays and say, okay, I see what you're doing here. I see where we're going with this. Also, this is a little bit of an aside. If you write your essays, you submit your application, and you realize you made a mistake, there's a small grammatical error, maybe even put the wrong name of a school in there, please don't panic. Don't send emails to the school saying, please, can you replace my essay? They won't do it, and it simply calls attention to the error. Nobody's that worked up about a misplaced comma or a misspelled word. I would urge you to be careful and check your work. But if it happens, it's usually not fatal, and it's something that you shouldn't get overly invested in. So keep in mind, as we're talking about essays, we know it's not a perfect system, but it's the best one that we have. It's something that certainly is going to prepare you for the rest of your life, being able to synthesize ideas and communicate them effectively. Certainly in school, you're going to have to write papers. You're going to have to give reports. These are things that will continue to follow you throughout your professional life in, I'd say, 98% of all cases of things that you're going to do. And so we want to focus on that. The final piece of this is, as we loop back to where to put what, if you remember that conversation, yes, you have this 650 word common application essay, but you also have a series of shorter essays in the supplements. Be thoughtful about how you use your words. So 150 or 200 word essay is extremely short. So I want you to work on economy of language. You don't need large preambles, right? I've always been interested in biosciences since the 7th grade field trip we took to the Science Museum. Right? That is lengthy. It burns a lot of words, right? Seeing the frog dissection or my first frog dissection hooked me on biology, period, right? Boom, cuts right to the point, gets you right in the middle of the action. We don't need lengthy preambles. You can take some shortcuts and condense your prose in the shorter essays to make sure you get your point across. Likewise, if you are talking about why you want to attend a particular school, and most schools will have some version of the essay, why do you want to attend our school? Using things like course titles can waste a lot of words. You can talk about studying with a particular professor and relating them to your interest. Think about ways always that you can be economical with language. You can burn off extra words. I was going to say superfluous words, but I'm not following my own advice. And put those in a way that just is clear and direct to the reader. So I hope that we've been able to communicate today why essays matter, why communication matters. Practice your writing. The other thing that is great for communication, for storytelling, is reading. I know that in today's world, none of us reads as much as we want to, especially high school students that are doing loads of homework every night and have all these extracurricular commitments. But reading fundamentally from a young age. Parents, get your children invested in reading. Read with them, read to them, encourage their reading on their own, because reading absolutely helps this concept, this idea, this foundation of storytelling, and then will give you a fluency and a comfort with language that is very important. And finally, for our international students, I think that a little, what I would say essays are a little rough around the edges are fine, right? So English is a tricky language, and certainly, in communicating, in translating over from, let's say, your mother tongue, there will be some inconsistencies, and that's okay. What I don't want you to do as an international student, what I advise you not to do, is write an essay and then, for example, run it through ChatGPT to smooth it out. Because if I'm reading your essay and I see that you're from another country, let's say you're from Norway, and I read this essay that is in, perfect English, it's going to make me a little bit suspicious. It's going to make me then doubt the authenticity of everything else that you've put and written in that application. So, to thine own self be true. Be sure you are being honest. Be sure you are using your own voice. You've discovered your voice. You find that voice that works best for you to communicate your own personal story. Thank you for listening. Please follow us on our socials to get more nuanced takes on these essay questions. Thank you for joining us today. Please take a moment to subscribe to the Admittedly podcast and download this episode. I welcome you to share your thoughts and questions with me. You can find us on social media at Admittedly Podcast. I look forward to continuing our journey together.